Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? I think so, yes. Okay. So thank you for showing up for the Copyright Challenges and Opportunities panel. It's a great pleasure to be here today with you. And first of all, I'd like to welcome my two wonderful speakers. With me here are Tina Mamulashvili. She's the director of Baku Sulakori Publishing and co-founder of the Georgian Book Institute. In the past, she has been the chair of the Georgian Publishers and Booksellers Association, among a number of other roles, including organizing collective stands for Georgia, organizing a music festival, and she's also worked in news, so a very broad range of experience. Thank you for coming. It's great to have you with us. With us also is Mehmet Erkurt. Some of you may have listened to him yesterday already, but I will still give a very short introduction. Mehmet is Deputy Editor-in-Chief and Fiction Editor of Can Çocuk Yayınları. Sorry, my Turkish is terrible. And he's also a translator from French. And he also has experience in a broad range of key roles in publishing. So I'll be very interested to hear from you today. Welcome. I'm Jessica Senger. I work for the German Publishers and Booksellers Association in European and International Affairs, and I'm also the chair of the IPA's Copyright Committee. So, talking about copyright. Copyright is a broad subject and, well, raises a number of thoughts, I think, with our audience probably. But Tina, I'd like to start with you. So from a Georgian publisher's perspective, what would you say are the main challenges in the realm of copyright at the moment?
First of all, thank you very much, Jessica, and good morning, everybody. Well, copyright issues, first of all, well, I would like to have a little bit introduction because usually what the general practice would be the same as worldwide. Before we start a new project, before we start a new publication, we would usually acquire copyright and sign the contract either with Georgian, also illustrator, etc., or with international, where we buy rights, and that's our general practice since we started publishing in late 90s. As for the challenges is, I think, the biggest one is piracy, pirated copies, and I have brought some of them here. So we could find out that there are a number of best-selling titles which have been pirated recently, and we could find them in the open market. And the situation is that usually they would not appear in the bookshops. Usually, most of the bookshops cooperate with us, the publishers, and also there was Irakli talking about it, the biggest bookshop chain, Biblusi. We are working with them, and of course we work with them, like they acquire books from us on like weekly basis. We supply books to them, also other bookshops. So you would not find pirated copies in any bookshops. Mostly the bookshops are doing very well. But for them, as well as for publishers, the biggest problem is the outside stands. So this is a small places where usually people can find many other things, including books. And these stands allow, and also the legislation allows them to sell the second-hand books. Not the antiquity, of course, antiquity as well, but also second-hand books. And for them, there is no, it's kind of a chaotic, and they can sell without having the legal, like having the cashier or somebody. So they're just people outside in the bazaar or something. So, and they say whenever you approach them and find the pirated copies of your own books, they say, I didn't know it was pirated, I thought it was the second hand. And usually they would not give you the receipt or something, so you cannot even prove these people are selling something. It's impossible to prove. And together with other publishers, and also association was involved in this, when we found these kind of copies, We addressed the revenue service, etc., and they said, we will start to investigate. It was very funny that we could find a person who is really printing these pirated copies. We could find his name, his phone number even. We could make an investigation. But still, there was nothing happened. And still we're calling the people in the revenue service or financial institutions, and they said, we couldn't do anything because in our copyright law, according to our copyright law, there should be at least 5,000 laris. They should find the printing house which is printing the books, and there should be a damage, or let's say the fraud of 5,000 laris to start the criminal case. Also, it is according to our legislation, it's forbidden to sell the infringed copies also, and there's a fine between 500 laris and I think 3,000 laris, which is huge. But whenever you find one copy or two copies of the books, and you see that you cannot prove it because you cannot receive any receipt, so it's impossible to chase these. So, for instance, I have brought some of the books. Maybe this is a pirated copy of very famous book. This is original. No, not better, but yeah, you can tell it easily. This is. Here we have the bookmark, for instance, and they don't have the bookmark, and it's easy to tell. But yeah, they print it, and you cannot prove easily. So, but we have also some other books here. We have finally one of our employees is going to these places. We know these places. We know the stalls where they are selling the books, and he's like monitoring its situation. But nevertheless, it's not possible to do it everywhere. We do it in a constant basis. But on the other hand, for instance, in Kutaisi, when he went there, there was like the sellers were selling not only the just best-selling titles like these, but also the school textbooks. And another challenge, I will just go into this detail because we can later talk about digital infringement, etc. The issue with the school textbooks is that normally earlier we would print the textbooks and sell them. Since I think 2018 or 16, the Ministry of Education, no, 2013 I guess, they are printing the textbooks and delivering them free of charge. And on those textbooks, this is a very prominent site. You can read it that this is not for sale. These books, textbooks, is a part of government program, and they should be free of charge. But still, some of the books appear on the market. And so it's impossible to trace how they, well, most probably some of the print, sometimes it's even school teachers, or sometimes it's even parents, because they have another copies and they would give it to as a second hand because they have the copies from previous year from the older children, right? But mostly this is not one or two copies, but quite a lot of them. So on one hand, we have this problem. The best-selling titles appear as pirated copies on the market, and it's very difficult to trace them. And we can trace them, but we cannot find the legal solution. And the same situation with the school textbooks, which is really, really dangerous.
Thank you very much, Tina. It sounds as though you're really up against some serious enforcement questions there. Mehmet, does any of this sound familiar, or are there contrasting experiences in Turkey?
No, very familiar. Thank you, Jessica. Yes, indeed, we have similar problems regarding copyright and copyright infringement, as Tina clearly and perfectly unfolded. These two kinds of piracy, both physical and digital, follow a parallel pattern in Turkey too. The institution which works meticulously on copyright infringement in Turkey is Turkish Copyright and Licensing Association. Every year they publish reports of copyright infringement and pirate activities that they can detect, of course. Many of them are not detectable, like you said. And in order to do this, they request cooperation and support from some institutions, such as provincial and district police departments, directorates of national education, universities, municipalities, social security institutions, and even gendarme commanderies. So, like you said, Tina, for physical piracy, there's a very common situation in Turkey. Like you said, even in metropolitan cities like Istanbul and Ankara, we have some bookstores in some markets or some passages. We have passages under where there's a lot of stores, but it's not. They are very centered, and everybody know that they sell pirated books. But like you said, they say second-hand books, and what is difficult to detect is that when there's a lawsuit, some judges say we need expert reports and expert reports, and of course that's creates serious losses of time, and so it's hard to continue the lawsuit. So that's why it can be easier. But if I begin by touching on the numbers, for example, in 2021, the Copyright and Licensing Association organized 87 raids, at the end of which they found 537,463 pirated publications. This is, of course, the sum of both physical and digital, not just physical. And let's go 1 year earlier, 2020, they organized 149 raids and found 466,758 pirated publications. Just 2 years, last 2 years. These numbers, both raids and pirated publications, neither increase or decrease per year. I mean, from year to year. It's a constant fluctuation. It changes. And maybe we can touch upon during the pandemic what happened. For example, the amount of time to reading has increased. Of course, you know, everybody was at home, maybe reading news than books, but in many households, people wanted to buy more books. And however, we witnessed that bookstores were closed for an indefinite time. E-commerce sites could no longer keep up with the orders. And in addition, of course, there were a lot of uncertainties and economic concerns about the future. So in this period, both the number of shared PDFs and the sites with PDF uploads increased in Turkey. And these were not just PDFs of fiction. There was a lot of interest in educational publications, like you said, textbooks and test question banks, which is very, very popular in Turkish educational system. The number of pirated PDFs, just PDFs detected in 2021, is 117,187. And after YouTube, the most pirated sharing was on PDF sites, after YouTube. File sharing was sometimes made on closed, encrypted accounts, but also on open accounts, very freely. Let's add another channel that is not reflected in the reports, that cannot be reflected in the reports, Telegram. Much more than WhatsApp, because which is also cannot be reported for now. WhatsApp, you know, unlike WhatsApp, you can open groups of thousands or 10 of thousands of people in Telegram, and these are closed groups. And a single PDF you share, you reach a number of users at the same moment, incredible number of users. It means that you can deliver a number of maybe 5 reprinted editions in a single post. It's quite. Of course, COVID made it difficult to reprint the books. This in turn led to an increase in the sale of pirated books on shopping sites too. Not only e-book sites, but shopping sites. These are kind of sites where everyone opens their own e-shop and products are sold without supervision. Yes. Among the most pirated books in the last 5 years, just a couple of them. For example, Me Before You by Jojo Moyes, My Sweet Orange Tree by Jose Mauro de Vasconcelos, Tutunamayanlar by Oğuz Atay, Seeing and Blindness by Jose Saramago, of course 1984 by George Orwell, 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, etc. It goes on like that. And let's finish, with the children's literature, Charlie's Chocolate Factory by Roald Dahl and Wimpy Kid by Jeff Kinney, which are the most Of course, when we look at the children's literature, of course, we witness another dimension, not only the need or the joy of reading, but also the necessity, the felt obligation to access books. Obligation because children need some of these books for their school program, for their school curricula. Some have homeworks to prepare, some have mandatory readings. And necessity because children were at home and isolated from their friends, so it was indispensable for parents to have books for their children's free time. Especially when the bookshops were closed for 3 or 4 months, and there we had huge amounts of copyright infringement cases. I finish by, what does the Copyright and Licensing Association do when it encounters a pirated content? I finish with that. First of all, they use a system called warn and remove, which makes it possible for everyone to report it through its website, its official website. The reported content is reviewed, and if it's determined to be pirated, a warning is issued. That means that the website has to remove the content in 3 days. If they do not do that, the access to the site is blocked. Of course, these processes are easier on platforms such as Google and YouTube because they have their own reporting systems and the platform intervenes.
Thank you, Mehmet. That was a very condensed and very useful overview of what's going on. Thank you. Tina, anything you want to add on the impact of the pandemic or digital piracy in Georgia?
As you can see, the digital pirates are even more creative than the legislative organs because they always are ahead of time. We always also have the similar problems, and we could find the books on groups on Facebook or closed groups, not Telegram or WhatsApp so far. I'm afraid we could find as well if we try, but so far it was mostly on Facebook. And there would be a group called, for instance, Bookworms, and they're very happy to share the PDFs. And it's it's very easy to not even to scan and make the digital PDFs. You don't need to do it very easy technologically. So there are thousands of such kind of groups. We try to chase them, to report them, of course. Sometimes our lawyer sends them a message, sometimes they respond. Of course, we have also some, like in legislation, we have also the clauses about the digital piracy, but as I said, it's very difficult to enforce these kind of measures, and it's really a big problem. And during pandemic, also all bookshops were closed here in Tbilisi and everywhere in Georgia. Also, these open stalls and places where they sell second-hand books, they were closed. We tried our best to work and supply the books via online, like through our website. But I'm pretty sure we didn't trace the situation, and I'm really impressed about the numbers, because in Georgia it will be very difficult to retrieve statistics about the infringement. I don't know how you did trace them, but for us it's a big problem. As I told you, we sent a letter, and we met the people in revenue service and financial. It's called financial police or something like that, and they didn't even, they tried to react, of course, but they didn't have any results. So I'm really impressed, because you have this kind of information which is not known in Georgia so far.
Actually, it was, this association works together with Turkish Publishers Association. They share the same informations, but they also say that it's what we can detect. There's not such claim that we see it all.
But this is really interesting. So you say, as a publishers association, you're collaborating with government there. You know, maybe this is an area where we can also share best practices and some experiences between, you know, different parts of the world where we face very similar challenges, but can have a conversation about, you know, experiences in how to tackle that.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, this licensing association is like a professional association. They are always in close contact. I maybe misinterpreted with Turkish Publishers Association, but all these data is also provided to the, like you said, to the embassy, to the government.
Okay, thank you for that. Certainly a conversation to be continued. I was also asked to bring to you a little bit of news from the World Intellectual Property Organization, and it's very interesting that you've, Mehmet, touched on this increased need, which I'm sure is similar in Georgia during the pandemic, an increased need for access, especially to learning materials, you know, families more or less locked up at home, needing to school children at home, and maybe also increased realization of how important quality books and learning materials are in that space and beyond. But at the World Intellectual Property Organization, where the member states of the United Nations have their conversations about copyright policy and what copyright should look like globally, we've seen a lot of pressure from organizations who are actually trying to undermine copyright and to weaken the copyright framework to say, oh, the pandemic shows, you know, that copyright is an obstacle to access, that copyright is preventing children from being taught, things like this. I mean, it sounds ridiculous to our ears, but unfortunately, these arguments are being made. It is excellent that we've been able to respond and show the great examples of how access was provided in a legal way, with permission, with remuneration to publishers and authors, of course. But that's really important, you know, to be able to do. Would you like to add something?
Yes, I would like to add that when the pandemic started in Georgia, several publishers, including us, we understood the situation, and we gave the free access to all our school textbooks and educational material, not only us, but several other publishers. So they were, it was kind of a website where they could access them free of charge. And it was open for several weeks or something like that until the end of school year, because it was like by the end of school year. But later it was, later on it was kind of a, sometimes the schools were locked down, sometimes they were open, so it was very difficult to track this, but many publishers were very eager to share for free the school, especially learning materials, because we understood the complexity of the situation, and in Georgia we don't have, we have the platform for learning materials, which is totally free of charge because it's commissioned by the government. But on the other hand, the textbooks and e-textbooks were given free access by the publishers in Georgia.
That's an amazing example, I think, of how publishers really stepped up to help and to support their communities and support learning and education. And of course, we see many of these examples across the world. I could also mention the academic publishers who made research into COVID accessible very easily, very fast, and for free. And we're talking here about quality research, not something somebody self-published somewhere. So the really cutting-edge research was made available in that way. And at the same time, it's so important, I think, that we remain firm and established on the fact that these are exclusive rights, and that free access can be a solution in an emergency situation when it's voluntary and when authors agree to that, but is not the way forward, of course, in terms of policy. So thank you for those examples. So you've been mentioning that there is a legal framework in place which ordinarily would prevent piracy. It's even a criminal offense in Georgia to a certain extent. So would you say that it's really just the question of getting law enforcement interested and activated, or are there also changes that you would like to see in the legislation to somehow improve the situation on the ground?
Actually, yes, it would be very helpful because, as I told you, it's very difficult. According to the legislation, you have to provide the information to enforce this law. Such a detailed information that sometimes it's difficult to maintain. But on the other hand, we talked with association, Georgian Copyright Association, if I'm not mistaken, and we told them about this problem and asked them, maybe you will find a solution for us, or just find kind of a best practices around the world, how it works, so that we could be more efficient, more effective. So far, no answer from them, but I know that there are some organizations which are working on that, but I think we should, as publishers and as association, do much more to initiate such changes in legislation, etc. By the way, the pirates also, it's a very interesting thing, they always find a solution how to avoid the legislation. As I told you, there is a criminal case if there is if somebody finds the amount of infringed books more than 5,000 laris, right? So what these pirates do is interesting as well. They don't print in one place. They order to print the inside of the book in one printing house or small, like risograph or some small printing shop, and they print the cover somewhere else. They take somewhere else to bind. So it's very difficult to find who is, because as I talked to these financial officers, they said, you know, we are going to make a case when we will order, let's say, so-called order, to one of the printing houses. But not one printing house is involved. They are doing this so that it's very difficult to trace them. So I think people working on legislation should be at least as creative as pirates are.
Well, I think this is a really good point, because we're looking here at some pretty sophisticated, well, you could say criminals, but certainly people engaged in serious illegal activity. And this is not being done by a mistake. There's, you know, a sound plan behind that. But on the other hand, I think, Mehmet, I wonder what your thoughts are. Readers, sometimes, you know, they're not trying to break the law, and they end up maybe buying a book that somebody said, oh, it's second-hand, or you know, they found it and they couldn't perhaps distinguish, because I'm seeing these copies here that look very similar. So what about readers? You know, are they aware of what's going on? Are there ways in which we can improve awareness?
Very good question, Jessica, and very open, sometimes very open to commentary, but according to the president of the Copyright and Licensing Agent Association, the copyright law in Turkey is clear enough. For example, they don't need a lobbying to change the law. Prohibitions and limits and fines are clearly stated. But even though the law is accessible by everyone, you know it, no one accesses it. Laws are like that. It's accessible, but no one accesses it. If I mention a few situations, a few examples that we observed during the COVID period especially. For example, some Twitter users announced that they opened their library in their tweets. It's like an announcement. What they meant was that they shared the drive link where they uploaded the PDFs. And they were making this announcement with such heroism, with such self-confidence that you might think it was Robin Hood. So it's some of course were deliberately against the law. They say that law of copyright is not democratic for the culture. There are people saying that. There are academicians saying that in Turkey. I was flabbergasted when I heard once. And but some, like you said, saw it as a genuinely legitimate act of solidarity, like a left-wing act. So let me give you a few examples of the answers you get when you publicly oppose these tweets. I tried personally. What do you mean? Should we not read a book? Not everyone is as lucky as you in reaching a book. Then publishers should accelerate the production of e-books. Then the books should reach us faster. These kind of answers. And the second situation is one situation. The second situation we observed in this process was the sharing of books on social media. This was not unexpected, of course, because most of them were made in, book events are transferred to internet, to online meetings. Although most of them were made in good faith and out of ignorance, these posts resulted in serious copyright infringement. For example, long extract sections were read on YouTube and Instagram with the intention of quoting a part of the book. We also witnessed that the whole book was read, especially in picture books, which is the texts are short. Moreover, in a significant part of these readings, the impressum of the book was not even included. Who wrote it, which publishing house, for example. So, in this process, we have seen that teachers, school teachers, do not have enough knowledge on this subject. Or that they are not, hard to say, I don't want to blame anyone, but maybe not sensitive enough. Many asked permission to send the PDF of the book to the class, because, of course, there were also those who did it directly without even asking, because the classes were on Zoom or Microsoft Teams, you know. And we also met very conscious teachers, the teachers who warned their colleagues and helped the publishing house in this regard. I don't think that all the teachers are want to share the PDFs. Interestingly, this has made the subject of copyrights more widely discussed than before in Turkey during this COVID time. But what was interesting, maybe most interesting for me, I saw that publishers were also confused on the subject, especially at the beginning of this process, the period of COVID. There have been many publishers who wanted to help the teachers with whom they have been collaborating for years, even for once, just one PDF, but of course they didn't do that because this would create an unavoidable expectation on behalf of the teachers. On the other hand, it would cause children to think that sharing the book like that, in this way, was quite legitimate. However, the confusion of the publishers was not limited to PDFs. Publishers who were deprived of promotional activities also turned on online promotions. We all did. Among these promotions, there were also the book readings we mentioned earlier. Sometimes it was read by a responsible of the publishing house. Sometimes a famous person read it. Sometimes the author himself or herself read it. Sometimes a chapter, just a chapter was read. Sometimes the whole book. Under the supervision of the publishing house. Of course, it was legally legitimate for the publishing house to organize this because the necessary written permissions were obtained from the author, from the illustrator, and the publishers itself. There was both consent of the author and the consent of the, I forgot, people who are the parents or the children of the author, if the author is dead. Yes. Yeah, sorry, I forgot the name. Yes. However, one point was missed. The publisher did not explain how it justified this action. I mean, the unknown part was still unknown. So the citizens who saw the posts came to this following conclusion: if publishing houses and writers are doing it, there's no harm for us in doing it. So, to wrap up, everyone was sure of something. Copyright had to be understood primarily on a cultural basis. Otherwise, publishers could turn into misleading references even with their legal practices.
That's very interesting. Thank you for that example, because I think, it shows how it feels so right to do nice things with books, but it depends who's doing it and with whose permission, and this, I think, we need to talk more about that. Tina, have you experienced similar examples or?
It's very similar,
yes,
actually,
okay.
Georgia. We have very similar practices because the people who infringe the copyrights and upload the PDFs, they usually have this argument, we are doing a very right and good thing, and, it's kind of a leftist ideas how... But of course, raising awareness is a very important thing among readers, and you rightly underlined this. Very important that people should be aware of what is copyright, why they should not infringe it, and why it's important to protect the rights of the authors, illustrators, translators, etc. And also there is one thing which is very controversial about the digital promotion. Of course it's very controversial because we never have, I don't think whether there is anywhere in the world the study to find out whether this kind of free reading on YouTube, which we also experienced, really promote those titles or not. Because when I talked with publishers in my own publishing house, they said, you know, they are helping, they are promoting those books somehow. So when I think they help us somehow, but no study there is about it, and also I think it's very controversial, very controversial. We don't do that. Usually parents do this kind of readings, and we have some picture books exactly like Mehmet mentioned. We have also the readings on YouTube mainly, but maybe they are, I don't know.
Well, thank you. This is really interesting because we're seeing, I think, that raising awareness is not just about teaching maybe kids in school a little bit about copyright, certainly teaching teachers about copyright and academic teachers and students at university about, you know, what they can do and what they can't do and why, and that there are reasons for this. It's not just, yeah. But also publishers, that publishers in the way they market or promote their books might be sort of setting a tone. And I think I can hear the conversation going on between the legal department and the marketing section in a publishing house already. So that's very interesting. Thanks for that. But to ask a concrete question on this awareness raising, are there ways in which we can collaborate to do that? Because I think this is something, I see this in Germany as well. It goes all the way through to the judiciary. You know, in the European Union, I wish we had a court that fully understands copyright. Okay, so that is a specialized court. Now that's taking it, you know, to the, perhaps to the highest level of enforcement of copyright. But are there things we can do to collaborate internationally? Are there campaigns we can do? You know, how can we get that message through, as you said, also at a cultural level, that it becomes more part of everyday reading culture?
I think just as we are doing here right now, we can share firstly for our experiences, so we can get, we can find out what points we need to touch upon. What are the patterns in different countries, different cultures. And like you said, I think you perfectly put it, teacher training programs are the first that comes to my mind too. Because teachers are the first ones to know how the textbooks and additional resources should be and how they will be used. They know, they are the first to know. Unfortunately, for example, another example from Turkey, in some books, in some of the textbooks from textbooks approved by the Ministry of National Education, because they approve some books that can be used on classes. We see works taken from publishing houses without permission. In fact, this unauthorized use reaches such a point that we witness also the pictures, the illustrations of the book are replaced with completely different ones. They just grab the text, and they can also make some changes in the text following the ideology of the publishing house or the ideology of the ministry at that time. And we witnessed that. We have many lawsuits with some new publishing houses. We don't even know if they're publishing houses, but publishers. I don't know. Like maybe it's just, yeah. And unfortunately, some publishers that I mentioned think that they will be exempted from these rules when it comes to education, like you said. Therefore, my second suggestion may sound a little bit harsh with all of us here as publishers, but publishers should be maybe compelled to some training and certificates at the establishment stage. Because copyright education is one of them. Many publishers don't know about the issue. We discovered that during the COVID. They have legal department, they have, of course, an advocate, a lawyer, but publisher is the one who sees the situation, who knows, who acts, and warns the legal department. But we have to learn before what we have to see and what we have to warn about. So I think there's a missing part in the publishing too. I think Turkish Publishers Association can do that, for example, in coordination with other IPA or other associations, because, for example, currently there's a clear, plain and very understandable information on how to make citations on the Turkish Publishers Association website. Why don't we do that for other subjects? Plain, understandable procedures for users of internet, Instagram, bloggers, Instagrammers, phenomena, I don't know, all these people who broadcasting content. And finally, but last but not the least, I think the issue of intellectual property could be addressed in schools too. Because the creation and production process of a book is a funny subject. And it can be told at an early age. It can also be helpful, for example, in raising a generation, maybe that won't immediately call the book expensive, because they know what's going on behind.
That's a very interesting suggestion. I think I'm making mental notes here to take back with me. Tina, do you have any proposals to add?
Yeah, very interesting, and thank you for this very interesting thoughts about it, which is really, really maybe could help somehow. Also, you mentioned about the international efforts, like raising awareness among readers and making a kind of a broad national or international campaign supporting this idea. But of course, school children are the one who could be addressed in the first case. And we often, as a publisher, before pandemics, we did it quite often. We even invited them to visit our publishing house, the schools, or even the children from kindergarten, to see the process. And sometimes it was a very nice part of the curricular non-curricular activity. I don't know how it's called exactly, but they would come and visit a publishing house first to see what the editors do, what the illustrators do, and then they would go and visit the printing house. So this is also a very nice part of raising awareness in very young people, but not only young children, but also reading public, and national or international kind of events could help a lot. So I think we should do a lot more than we are doing so far.
Mehmet, Tina, you reminded me something from the publishing house where I work, Can Çocuk. We published, long before me, published a book named Printing Toy, written by Yiğit Bener. And it explains the printing process in a fiction. And many teachers says that, thank you for this book, that's how we can tell and explain to students how printing, how we obtain a book, how the printing process goes on. So also this example reminded me this possible solution.
Well, thank you both very much. We've been going on for quite a while now. I would still like to give the audience the opportunity to put their questions to you now, if there are any questions. I see one hand up already back there. Do we have a microphone? Yes. Thank you very much.
გამარჯობა ყველას დღესაც. პირველად ამ პრობლემას დიოგენე შეეხო 20 წლის წინ და ჩვენი პირველი წიგნი, რომელიც არალეგალურად დაიბეჭდა და გავრცელდა, იყო სხვათა შორის ალი და ნინო. ძალიან დიდი რაოდენობით. 2007 წელს პირველად წავაწყდით სასკოლო წიგნების მასობრივ გაყალბებას და მაშინ მე მიმართე კოლეგებს და ჩემდა სამწუხაროდ ნაწილმა ვერ აღმოაჩინა, რომ ეს იყო მნიშვნელოვანი პრობლემა და სოლიდარობას მაშინ ვერ მივახციეთ. თუმცა მას მერე ბევრი რამე შეიცვალა. ეს არის ის თემა, რომელზეც მე ძალიან ბევრი მიფიქრია და საერთაშორისო გამოცდილებაც მინახავს და მათ შორის თურქეთშიც მინახავს და მაქვს ინფორმაცია, როგორ ებრძვიან საკმაოდ ეფექტურად შიგადაშიგ თურქეთში ამ პრობლემას, მაგრამ მე მინდა გითხრათ ერთი ძალიან პიროვნული გამოცდილების შესახებ, ჩემი შემოbrunების წერტილის შესახებ ამ პრობლემის მიმართ. Turning point. ეს მომენტი იყო რამდენიმე წლის წინ, როდესაც ჩვენ ფინანსურ პოლიციასთან ერთად მივედით წიგნის მაღაზიაში, რომელშიც იყიდებოდა არალეგალურად დაბეჭდილი წიგნები. სახელმძღვანელოები კერძოდ. და აი ამ წიგნის მაღაზიის მფლობელს ველაპარაკებოდი, ეს ყველაფერი ხდება ფინანსური პოლიციის თანდასწრებით, სხვათა შორის. და ბუნებრივი აღშფოთებული ვარ და ვეუბნები, რომ აი რატომ დაბეჭდეთ ეს სახელმძღვანელოები. როდესაც შეგეძლოთ თქვა ჩვენთან გეწარმოებინათ მოლაპარაკება და თუნდაც ლეგალურ ლიცენზიით გამოგეცათ. და უცების მეუბნება ესეთ რაღაცას. თქვენ თუ ყოფნით თავხედობა, რომ გამოსცეთ რობერტ მუზილის უთვისებო კაცი, რობერტ მუზილი გამოეცით საქართველოში ქართულ ენაზე, მაშინ ისიც უნდა მოითმინოთ, რომ იქნება არალეგალური გამოცემები სასკოლო სახელმძღვანელოების. მე ვიყავი აბსოლუტურად გაოგნებული ამ ფრაზით და აღმოაჩინე პარადოქსული ბუნება მისი ლოგიკის. და მივხვდი, რომ ეს არის ის რისკი, რომელსაც შეიცავს ჩვენი პროფესია. თუ ჩვენ გვინდა გამოვცეთ ძალიან ხარისხიანი ლიტერატურა, ნამდვილი ლიტერატურა, მაშინ გარკვეული თვალსაზრისით უნდა ანგარიში გაუწიოთ იმ ფაქტორს, რომ შეიძლება რაღაც მასობრივად მოხმარებული წიგნები იყოს არალეგალურად გავრცელებული. და ამ ყველაფერთან კავშირშია ის ძირითადი იდეა, რომელიც მე ახლა მინდა გავაჟღერო და რომელიც ეხება წიგნების ხელმისაწვდომობის ზრდას. მე ვფიქრობ, რომ ისეთ ქვეყნებში, როგორიცაა საქართველო, რომელსაც სერიოზული ეკონომიკური სირთულეები აქვს და ხალხი მასობრივად ღარიბია, ერთ-ერთი ყველაზე ეფექტური იარაღი, რომელიც შეიძლება ქონდეს სახელმწიფოს და საზოგადოებას, ეს არის წიგნებზე ხელმისაწვდომობის ზრდა. ლეგალურ ხელმისაწვდომობას ვგულისხმობ და ამ შემთხვევაში მე ვგულისხმობ უპირველეს ყოვლისა ბიბლიოთეკებს. იმიტომ რომ საქართველოში და მე ვფიქრობ ძალიან ბევრ ქვეყანაში საბიბლიოთეკო სისტემა არის უკიდურესად მძიმე მდგომარეობაში. და რადგან საზოგადოებას არ აქვს სათანადო ცნობიერება, მე ვგულისხმობ ზოგადად იურიდიულ ცნობიერებას, კანონის მიერ ცნობიერებას, ასე ვთქვათ. შესაბამისად ისინი ძალიან იოლად მიდიან ამ კომპრომისზე, ასე ვთქვათ, სინდისთან. იყიდონ არალეგალურად დაბეჭდილი წიგნები. ან ჩამოტვირთონ PDF ფაილები ინტერნეტიდან. და დიდწილად ეს არის განპირობებული სწორედ ხელმისაწვდომობის ნაკლებობით და ისეთი მნიშვნელოვანი ინსტიტუციების კულტურის განუვითარებლობით, როგორიცაა მაგალითად ბიბლიოთეკები. ეს ის მიმართულება, რომელზეც ჩვენ ნაკლებად ვლაპარაკობთ სამწუხაროდ, მაგრამ მე მგონია, რომ ერთ-ერთი ეფექტური გზა იქნება, ბუნებრივია სხვა ლეგალურ მექანიზმებს თუ სხვადასხვა ეფექტურ მექანიზმებს შორის. მადლობა.
Thank you for that extensive contribution and for broadening the subject a little out there. Would you like to respond? It's not really a question, but I think some points were made.
I exactly see your point for instance, from Turkey too, and this accessibility issue is one of the main reasons or pretexts of making pirated copies of the books. And during this COVID, it reminded me another example. For example, during COVID, publishing houses have some shortage on reprinting the books. And imagine what happened. Some books were unfoundable on the bookstores, and pirated copies were sold more. When there is an accessibility issue, of course, piracy heightens, rises. But with one of the things we have to think about how to make sustainable the accessibility in order to prevent the piracy.
Actually, yes, the situation with libraries in Georgia is not the best. We have only few libraries left. You mentioned the organization I'm also involved in. We organized several projects addressing this issue. So it was, for instance, purchasing the books for the libraries in small towns and villages. It was like 500 such libraries, and there was an amount of money in the presidential funds. So we organized this kind of project some years ago, but it was the one case. But another was that we made a small research on school libraries, because we as an organization, we found out that school libraries are in horrible situation, especially they have a lot of Russian books, and young children, they don't read, they cannot read in Russian anymore, and as for new books, they have a very limited number of the new titles published, and they have, for instance, if you find a book, it's like torn down because there are so many kids are reading it. So we made this research, and I started a project about school libraries, and I addressed first of all the Ministry of Education, but they didn't want to fund this project. But finally I found the Georgian donor, biggest bank in Georgia, and they give me donation, and I have already refurbished and renovated school libraries in 10 different places. One is in Tbilisi, and the rest in regions, including the regions which are near to the so-called border. And so this is an amazing project, and we opened last week one in one of the regions where there is a major Armenian-speaking population, and there was a Georgian school where we opened this project. It was amazing effect, because children, they just during every break they just run to the library. Before they would not go there anyway, but it's a kind of a resource center in this school. And for this year, now we have already started. I have just signed the contract to do this same project in 5 more school libraries. In mountainous regions, in the regions where people have less access to bookshops and books, etc. And this has an amazing effect. So yes, we are trying to do something like that as well, to make books accessible to children, especially in regions where they don't have. And I hope this project will bear the fruits later as well.
I'm sure it will, Tina. Mehmet,
maybe this is
very
the part.
Quick.
This is the part where we can focus our lobbying activities about libraries and how their situation and the kind of the number of books they can buy, because libraries goes together with copyright issues.
Absolutely, I agree entirely. This is.
Can I have a little remark.
No, I'm sorry. I think we need to wrap up now.
It's not a question. It's not a question. Sorry.
I realize, but I'd also like to just finish and congratulate Tina on this amazing project, because I think you're absolutely right. Access to books through legal means, through libraries, through school and teaching, they definitely go together. And it's important that we look at that more complex issue as a larger issue, and also that we make those distinctions between what's legal and what isn't legal, because as a copyright lawyer, I would add the argument that even in countries where you have excellent libraries, really well-equipped libraries, you still see piracy and you still see disregard for copyright. So it's not super simple. It's a more complex issue. Okay, thank you. And now it's your turn from the audience.
ჩემი რეპლიკა ეხებოდა იმას, რომ რასაკვირველია მაღალ განვითარებულ ქვეყნებშიც არის მეკობრეობის პრობლემა და შეუძლებელია ეს არ იყოს. და აქ არ არის ლაპარაკი კერძო ინიციატივებზე, რომელიც შეიძლება კონდეს თითოეულ გამომცემლობა საქართველოში და ყველას გვაქვს რაღაც ინიციატივები, რა თქმა უნდა. აქ ლაპარაკია იმაზეა, რომ ზოგადად განვითარდეს საბიბლიოთეკო ქსელი და ბიბლიოთეკებში იყოს წარმოდგენილი ყველა ის წიგნი, რომელიც საზოგადოებისთვის საინტერესოა და რომელიც გამოიცემა და რომელიც კულტურული ფაქტია. ანუ აქ არის ლაპარაკი იმ ტიპის საჯარო ბიბლიოთეკებზე, რომელიც გერმანიაში არაჩვეულებრივად არის განვითარებული.
Okay, thank you for giving a shout out to libraries there. Are there any quick questions? Any more? Otherwise, perhaps catching up over coffee is also a good option. I won't stand between everyone and their coffee. Thank you so much for your contributions and for your attention.